Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is the first work of science fiction ever written. For the past 200 years, it has inspired countless adaptations, including films, comics, video games, plays, poems, short stories, and other novels. At the same time, Frankenstein itself was creative for many parts. That is, literary works, intellectual and artistic movements, and scientific ideas that the novel's author, the 19-year-old Mary Shelley, was interested in at the time, as well as her own personal tragedies. This semester, we will be studying many of these different influences that went into writing Frankenstein, including books, poems, myths, science, and the current events that were shaping Shelley's worldview. We will also study Frankenstein's afterlives to see how the novel inspired a play and some films. By the way, don't forget that Frankenstein is Victor Frankenstein, the name of the scientist who creates a creature that has no name. This in itself is significant throughout the novel. Somewhere along the way in the last 200 years, the name Frankenstein has started to be associated in popular culture with the monster rather than its creator. But in Shelley's novel, the monster has no name, he's just the creature. The goal of this part of the lecture on Frankenstein letters 1 through 4 is to contextualize the form and themes of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, specifically to learn the terms epistolary novel and frame story, and to situate Frankenstein into a literary context of Romanticism. Also, I want you to get a sense of how to close read a text and to use quotations to help you in your explication. In the first 4 letters, we're introduced to Robert Walton, a 28-year-old adventurer who's writing to his sister, Margaret Saville, who lives in England. The rest of the frame narrative is made up of Victor Frankenstein's tale as well as the creature's tale, and they nest within each other like Russian dolls in volumes 1, 2, and 3. The place names at the beginning of the book may have a Christian connotation. Walton is traveling on the post road between St. Petersburg and Archangel, which may remind us of St. Peter's Gate and the Archangel. But these are, of course, real places. St. Petersburg, there's an image on the lower left-hand side of the slide, is the second most famous and second largest city after Moscow, and it was the capital of Imperial Russia at the time of the writing of Frankenstein. Archangel, is a city in the very north of Russia, close to the Arctic Circle. The author of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, had herself traveled considerably, though not as far as Russia as Walton has in her novel. Shelley had been privileged enough to spend months traveling through Italy, France, and Switzerland, as well as her native England with Percy Bysshe Shelley, her future husband, before her 18th birthday. In fact, if you look at the postcard of Chamonix in France, a place that Shelley had actually gone to, you can see her inspiration perhaps for what she imagined the Russian Arctic to look like. In letter 4 of the novel, Walton describes his sister as having, quote, been tutored and refined by books and retirement from the world, and you are therefore somewhat fastidious. But this only renders you the more fit to appreciate the extraordinary merits of the, quote, divine wanderer, the mysterious stranger that we meet in letter 4. What about Margaret's character does Robert Walton think would endear her to Victor Frankenstein? Walton seeks both adventure and beauty, 2 markedly romantic pursuits. He sees, quote, perpetual splendor in what other people see as frost and desolation, and which he himself describes as being, quote, surrounded by ice, which enclosed on the ship on all sides, scarcely leaving her the sea room in which she floated. Walton explains that for the last 6 years he has dedicated himself to his passion for exploration. He describes his resolution to go to the North Pole and find a northern passage, quote, fixed as fate, and emphasizes that, quote, success shall crown his endeavors. While he could have lived a very comfortable life, quote, in ease and luxury in England, he chose instead to work on whaling ships. In the 19th century, whales were hunted for their meat and blubber. The practice continues today in a much more restricted form in certain countries, and he learned how to sail. Now he says he feels that he has paid his dues and deserves, quote, to accomplish some greater purpose. And yet, Walton is also lonely and frightened of being alone. Quote, I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine, he says. I bitterly feel the want of a friend. He makes an allusion to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, a long poem that is similarly about loneliness, desolation, and exploration. But we'll come back to Coleridge's poem in a few slides because you're also reading it this week. The story shifts to action in letter 4 when Walton suddenly encounters a, quote, apparition, a man of gigantic stature traveling quickly across the frozen Arctic Ocean on a dog sled, followed by the coming aboard of a mysterious, emaciated, half-dead man who is pursuing the giant. Of course, we will learn later that the second man is Victor Frankenstein. Remember that the monster, the demon, or the creature as he is called, has no name. It's unclear why Frankenstein's monster took on the name of his creator in subsequent adaptations, especially Hollywood ones. But the man, make no mistake, who comes on board is the scientist, Victor Frankenstein. Walton is immediately drawn to Frankenstein. I never saw a more interesting creature. His eyes have generally an expression of wildness and even madness, but there are moments when, if anyone performs an act of kindness towards him or does any of the most trifling service, his whole countenance is lighted up, as it were, with a beam of benevolence and sweetness that I never saw equaled. Keep this description in mind for later in the novel. It is not an accident that creature is the word Shelley chooses for the monster's creator, as well, though obviously innocently from Walton's point of view, since he doesn't know anything about Frankenstein's story yet. Could this be the friend that Walton is searching for? He writes, I begin to love him as a brother, and his constant and deep grief fills me with sympathy and compassion. The stranger says that he has lost everything and would not be able to start life over again, whereas Walton is just beginning his life. What is interesting about this contrast? Notice that the stranger says, my fate is nearly fulfilled. And yet they are the same age. How does that parallel and distort something that Walton had written about fate earlier? How does the fate of the captain in Coleridge's rhyme also seem to parallel what we begin to learn about Victor Frankenstein in letter 4? Walton hasn't heard the story yet, but he uses the metaphor of a ship in a storm to describe what it must be like, further reminding us of Coleridge. Strange and harrowing must be his story, frightful the storm which embraced the gallant vessel on its course and wrecked it. In this metaphor, it seems that the gallant vessel represents Frankenstein, and the storm is his story. I hope you've already started reading on in advance to find out what this wild story is. The next part of this lecture focuses on Rime of the Ancient Mariner. First, I want to introduce you to the term ballad. We want to use the ballad form to learn poetry terms, including stanza, rhyme scheme, meter, alliteration, chiasmus, which is an X-shaped pattern of words, as we'll see in a minute, and repetition. I want you to practice reading the poem out loud and hear all those elements. So, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner was written in the form of a ballad, which I'll discuss more in the following slides. The frame of the poem is outside of a church where a wedding is about to happen. The wedding guest is deterred by an old sailor who feels the need to tell him a story about an incredible adventure. The sailor's story takes place in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean, so not the North Pole this time, but the South, on a sailboat, and no wind and no sun that ever sets because it's summer. A ballad is a kind of narrative poem. That is, it tells a story, often in the third person, that is usually organized into 4-line stanzas called quatrains. It mixes song and poetry, and it developed in the 14th century in France and quickly became very popular in England. Ballads are supposed to be playful and remind you of nursery rhymes. Think Baa Baa Black Sheep, which is in ballad form. With seemingly simple language deployed in melodious ways, and the rhythm of the ballad can vary. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner's rhythm is a mix of iambic tetrameter, which is 8 syllables alternating between unstressed and stressed syllables, and iambic trimeter, 6 syllables. The rhyme scheme is usually A, B, C, B, second and fourth lines in each quatrain rhyme. So, for example, I looked upon the rotting sea and drew my eyes away. I looked upon the rotting deck, and there the dead men lay. So a few really interesting notes here. There's a lot more to say about it, but just to begin with, what this rhyme scheme means is that the words away and lay rhyme. We mark that the first line's ending C with an A. Away is marked with a B. Deck does not rhyme with any of the words above, so it is a C. Lay rhymes with away, so another B. So that's why we say that the rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B. There's some other things in here too, like the repetition of the word rotting. Because Coleridge liked to break the rules, there are also many 6-line stanzas that include subtle, playful refrains or repetitions in the last 2 lines. Here the rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B, D, B. And I had done an ellish thing, and it would work 'em woe. For all averred, I had killed the bird that made the breeze to blow. Ah, wretch, said they, the bird to slay that made the breeze to blow. A couple of interesting things here. You have a lot of interesting interior rhymes, averred and bird, and a beautiful alliteration, sense of alliteration for Coleridge. It's very important. Alliteration, remember, is the repetition of consonant sounds. So you have breeze and blow and work and woe. In the next slide, you'll see a really exaggerated one. And there's refrain. Refrain is repetition. So that made the breeze to blow, the 4th and 6th lines, that's repeated. However, the 3rd and 5th lines as well, there's a sort of incomplete refrain there. And there's also what's called a chiasmus, which in Greek means an X or crossing. It is 2 lines, this time they're interrupted by a line, but 2 lines close together where you have a crossing pattern. So you have killed the bird and the bird to slay. So notice in a diagonal pattern you have bird, and killed and slay, which are synonyms. If you read the example out loud, you'll hear the rhythm of the odd numbered lines is da-dum, 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 4 feet of iambic tetrameter. You might be used to iambic pentameter, which has 2 additional syllables, da-dum, 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 da-dum. That's a very typical meter that's used in English a lot, in Shakespeare particularly in his sonnets, which you may have studied before. But here it's called iambic tetrameter or tetrameter, meaning 4 feet of iambic tetrameter, meaning 4 feet. A foot is 2 syllables. While the even lines are only 3 feet long, and it would work 'em woe. So da-dum, 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 6 syllables. For all averred, I had killed the bird. There you have 8 syllables again. That made the breeze to blow. Again, 6. So you alternate between, or Coleridge alternates between 8 and 6. In other places, however, Coleridge plays with that odd-even rule above and changes to couplets of each meter. So he also plays quite a lot with the meter as well as the rhyme scheme. So the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew. We were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. The furrow followed free. So you have again, the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, that's 8. We were the first that ever burst, again 8. So a couplet is a group of 2 lines, a couplet of iambic tetrameter, and then into that silent sea, the furrow followed free, 2 lines of iambic trimeter, 6 syllables. Coleridge changes the rhyme scheme quite a bit also, as we saw before, so don't be surprised to see some stanzas that contain both refrain and a change in the rhyme scheme. Here's one. Water, water everywhere. This is one of the most famous lines of the poem. And all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. Thank you for listening to this lecture. I hope it was interesting. I hope it helps you understand the texts. And if you want to read more about ballads, there's 2 websites that are linked here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Have a wonderful week and work hard.